Good afternoon. My name is Bo Adams, and I serve as director of Pitt's Theology Library here at Emory University. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this two-day virtual symposium, sponsored jointly by the Institute for Signifying Scriptures and Pitt's Theology Library. What brings us together is the astonishing and provocative exhibition curated by our friend and colleague, Dr. Vincent L. Wimbush. I'm excited to participate in this forum that will celebrate, engage, and foster learning from the work of Dr. Wimbush, a partnership with Pitt's and Candler School of Theology that began months ago and I hope will continue for many years to come. My job here today is to provide some introduction to you all, and I want to do that in a couple of ways. First, I'd like to introduce you to our plan for the next 2 days, offering you a guide to our schedule and the logistics of this virtual platform we're all using. Second, I want to provide some introduction to Dr. Wimbush's exhibition and the tremendous work that has gone into the production of this display. Third, I want to provide an introduction to Dr. Wimbush himself, whose critical insights, thoughtful reflection, spirit of collaboration, and hard work bring us all here today. But let's start with how we'll proceed over these next 2 days together. Dr. Wimbush has assembled an incredible panel of 10 guests whom I'm looking forward to learning from. And we'll do that in 2 sessions, one today that will run from now to 4 p.m., and then another tomorrow, which will run from 9 a.m. to noon. All of these times are Eastern time. Today's session will begin with a 45-minute lecture from Dr. Wimbush himself. As he finishes his remarks, likely around 2 p.m. Eastern, we'll adjourn for a 15-minute break, accompanied by music that has been curated by Dr. Wimbush. During these breaks, and there will be a couple over the couple of days, I invite you to walk away from your computer as necessary, but please keep the website open as the session will continue on schedule after the break on the same website. After that initial 15-minute interlude, our panel discussion will begin, running approximately from 2:15 to 3:30 Eastern today. This panel will be moderated by Dr. Velma Love, who will invite introductions from the 4 panelists who will each offer brief remarks in response to Dr. Wimbush's lecture and exhibition. We will allow time for exchanges between these panelists, and then around 3:40, we'll adjourn for another quick 5-minute break, where again, I will invite you to keep your computer open. We will then leave time around 3:45 this afternoon for Dr. Love to moderate questions and comments that come from you, the audience. So that leads me to you, the audience, and your role in this event. While you'll be seeing and hearing from our panelists, whose cameras and microphones will be turned on and off as appropriate, we want to hear from you, but in a textual form. So if you look at your screen on the right side, you will see a section labeled Q&A. And it's there that you can type comments or questions throughout the presentations today. These will be fielded by Dr. Love throughout the comments today. And then at the end of the session, she will select some to be presented to Dr. Wimbush and the panelists. We will, of course, pass along all of the comments and questions that are offered today. We'll end today's session around 4 p.m., but please remember that this is only day 1 of a 2-day symposium. We'll invite you to come back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern for the second day of panelists and discussion. If you have any questions or you experience technical challenges throughout the session, please feel free to email theologyref@emory.edu, and we'll do our best to help you out. Before turning to Dr. Wimbush's introduction, I want to say a quick word about the digital exhibition that is the focus of our analysis. The collaboration between Dr. Wimbush and Pitt's Theology Library these last few months has been particularly exciting for me. I'm often asked as a librarian, in light of the pandemic and the rise of digital tools, what exactly is the role of an academic library? I'm proud to say that the work of my colleagues and Dr. Wimbush that we've been engaged in these last few months, along with the programming that we're sponsoring these 2 days, offers a very strong answer to that question. Long gone are the days where libraries are geographically limited repositories and spaces, locations where the isolated scholarly enterprise happens. Instead, I see libraries as catalysts for conversation, as gateways that lead people to resources and insights that may be spread across the globe. Partnering with a thinker like Dr. Wimbush and adding our technical and collection expertise to his vision is a perfect example of this future of libraries. The exhibition, which you will find at pitts.emory.edu/masquerade, is the product of Dr. Wimbush's vision and the hard work of many colleagues here at the library, a few of whom I'd like to identify by name. Anne McShane, our digital asset librarian, digitized many of the works that you see online. Brenna Michael, our cataloging and metadata librarian, described those items and ingested them into the digital site that you see. Spencer Roberts, our systems and digital scholarship librarian, designed and developed the exhibition platform that allows you to see these objects. Anne-Marie McLean, our reference and outreach coordinator, is responsible for the beautiful graphics that you've seen advertising this event. And then perhaps most of all, my colleague Jamie Bostic, who runs logistics for the library. He's been essential to this entire project, handling everything from communication and coordination with the panelists, to identifying objects to include in the exhibition, to reviewing and responding to drafts of the exhibition, to running the technology of this very online event that we're participating in today. We all owe Jamie a huge debt of gratitude. All of these colleagues have worked hard these past few months, and I am so honored to spend time with them. But of course, no one has worked harder than our curator and honored guest today, Dr. Vincent L. Wimbush. Dr. Wimbush is, of course, an internationally recognized scholar of religion who most likely needs very little introduction to all of us. He's known to many through his prolific scholarship, including dozens of articles and essays, over 12 critically acclaimed books. His forthcoming book, a collection of his essays that mark the many turns in his academic career, is entitled Black Flesh Matters, Essays and Runagate Interpretation, and will be published by Lexington Books in 2022. Dr. Wimbush defines his scholarship as transdisciplinary, and so it's challenging to attempt to list all of the disciplines he participates in and has influenced. Though he's trained as a biblical scholar who has made significant contributions to New Testament studies, Wimbush is most interested in the phenomenology of scriptures, understood in the traditional sense as Holy Writ, but more significantly as those habits, patterns, and cultural norms that are often sacralized over time. This leads him in his work to uncover what is often hidden in plain view, with results that at times are uncomfortable or disorienting, but which I personally find to be productive, empowering, and enlightening. Perhaps his method and approach is best identified in his 2012 book, White Men's Magic, Scripturalization as Slavery, a book he describes, quote, as my own individual major statement, quote, a chance to collect and communicate with passion my ideas and arguments that ensue from my continuing fraught journey toward integrity, in the original and most profound sense of this term, of the different investments, pressures, challenges, orientations, interests, opportunities, politics, strivings, and passions of a career and personal and social life journey. Dr. Wimbush's contributions are certainly not limited to the printed page. He's been a frequent lecturer in academic and public contexts. He's even produced a documentary film, Finding God in the City of Angels, and he's served in leadership of major scholarly organizations, including notably as president of the Society of Biblical Literature. His work has garnered praise across academic disciplines, and his research has been supported by numerous successful grants from organizations including the Lilly Endowment, the Ford Foundation, and the Luce Foundation. To many, Dr. Wimbush is also known as a supreme teacher. He's taught at Claremont School of Theology and Claremont Graduate University, at Union Theological Seminary and Columbia University, at Harvard Divinity School, and at Williams College. Few students leave his classroom thinking the same way that they thought when they came into the classroom, and I know more than a few of his former students who see him as a mentor and guide, the person responsible for shaping a career or redefining an approach to ministry or teaching. I'm excited to remind you that he will be teaching a course here at Candler School of Theology in the spring entitled Scripture, Race, and Nation. I'm thrilled to have observed yet another turn in Dr. Wimbush's scholarly endeavors, and I will now add to his list of many accomplishments the status of expert exhibition curator. In our partnership over the last few months, Dr. Wimbush has used the medium of digital exhibition to teach and shape learners in a new way. By integrating the visual arts, archival records, audiovisual recordings, all with the printed page, Dr. Wimbush's digital exhibition, Masquerade, Scripturalizing Modernities Through Black Flesh, engages the senses in ways the printed page or the lecture can't simply do, creating an affective experience that does not merely argue a point like one might do in a book. Rather, the effect is to invite the viewer to reach his or her own conclusions about how worlds, be they worlds of an 18th century formerly enslaved person or someone living in America today, are indeed constructs, systems put together over time by individuals and organizations, and that all of us, through some, although in some ways different than others, continue to put on the masquerade, to play certain games to fit in, to have our voices heard, and in many ways to survive. Wimbush masterfully uses the visual elements made possible through digitization and the magic of the internet to create an exhibition that lays bare the games that have been and continue to be played, and he guides visitors to look around and consider anew how the world works. Please join me in welcoming my friend and our colleague, our curator, Dr. Vincent L. Wimbush.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adams, for that setup and that overly generous introduction. Let me also take just a moment to thank you for your original vision, for your invitation that we undertake this project together, for the many months of support, generous gestures, your good offices, work of planning and coordination that has brought us to this event. More expressions of thanks and gratitude can follow near the end of our two-day program together. Warmest greetings to all. I am so pleased and honored to welcome you to this event. Pleased and honored that you have given us your time and attention and participation. Welcome to all of you, wherever you are physically located, whether from Druid Hills to the west side of Atlanta or to India and France. Welcome. This is a big event in more respects than one. I have much to put on the table for consideration. What I have to offer, in addition to the exhibition itself, is here layered and thick, and there is limited time to unpack all that I think should be worked on and played with. So I should like to offer here 3 helpful aids or points for you to help you check the quality, clarity of my presentation, and also the quality in terms of your listening, thinking, comprehending experience. These I offer not so much for the sake of getting you to agree with me on this or that point or even the larger event itself, but to engage me, to engage the event. First, this very pointed challenge that I'd like to put in the boldest, starkest terms. If, when I am done, when we're done with this event, you conclude that this project is all about the following: these old standing categories: race, Black folk in particular; religion, understood in these broad and all too narrow terms; scriptures in narrow, traditional, literal terms; and old responses to such. If you're still there, you've missed the point. You should listen again, read again, until you come near a point of understanding, again, not necessarily agreeing with what has been put before you. You may, in the end, of course, want to agree with one of Joseph Conrad's characters in Heart of Darkness, shouting, "The horror, the horror." But understanding at the same time that what we are about has to do with nothing short of challenging a different order of an orientation to thinking itself, with the explosion, the destabilization of standing categories and social cultural practices, including those that are part of, but not necessarily limited to, the academy. All these that define our world. So that would be one checkpoint for you. The second, music. we're limited in terms of what use we can make of this genre, of course, but we will proceed with carefully chosen examples that will mark or define interludes within between sessions. These selections, I think, are telling and will help you come to a point of understanding what goes on here. So listen to the music. Third, in the form of epigraphs, 4 in number, that typically accompany addresses, essays, beginning of books. These can capture and serve as helpful nodes of translation of many, if not all, major points that I should like to make today. You should keep in mind one, if not all, of the epigraphs I offer for this presentation when at points there is too much pressing on you at once, and when things seem bewildering or disturbing. So these 4 epigraphs are as follows. The primary function of writing is to facilitate slavery. Claude Lévi-Strauss. From Jacques Derrida of Grammatology Part 2. Il n'y a pas de hors texte. Sometimes translated, there is no outside the text, but we can argue about that. Zora Neale Hurston, of course she should follow now. Even the Bible was made over to suit our vivid imagination. And the 4th epigraph, music, just a snippet, Sideshow by Blue Magic, part of that famous Philly sound from the 1970s. Let me, with these few words, begin to help you with some orientation, and then we'll play just a part of the sound. Hurry, hurry, step right up, see the saddest show in town for only 50 cents. Step right up, hurry, hurry. Before the show begins, my friends, stand in line, get your tickets. I hope you will attend. It'll only cost you 50 cents to see what life has done to those like you and me.
Step right up, see the saddest show in town for only 50 cents.
Step right up, hurry, hurry, before the show begins. My friends, stand in line, get your tickets. I hope you will attend. Cents to see what life has done to those like you and me.
Everything about me was magic, the black-fleshed and the making and management of modernities. This project around which we gather and turn toward one another in discussion, I prefer to call, if not the none, perhaps more accurately, the meta exhibition. It is most certainly a complex contrapuntal project insofar as it does not have simple aims, does not aim to be an example or to showcase the traditional dominant cultural political orders, treasures, with Emery perhaps as the reigning example before us for the historical, imperial, European, colonial, nationalist, elite cultural, academic, institutional site or theater. What would normally or historically obtain for such a situation is the showcasing, here curation of manuscripts, printed books, images, but also objects, indeed going back far enough in time up to a point, but not so far from our own, even including, it is disheartening to say, the flesh, the bodies of constructed others. Much among such was stolen, certainly restrained and then conscripted, then impaneled, boxed, fixed. Different aspects and construals of the stable order dominant were historically and normally exhibited for the purpose of advancing the imperial, colonial, cum nationalist agenda, showcasing, hence internalizing, naturalizing a stable story, ideology, and politics. Such efforts in the service of naturalization of stability on the part of the political and social cultural regime has, in the placement of its found objects or symbols through the projects of curation or museumization or monumentalization or other types of performativity at court or in the high churches, public or private, established and fixed what we may call the reality. I am, in making this argument, thinking of, and with the fascinating theoretical work of social and cultural theorist Tony Bennett and others, of course, on modern museums and other cultural institutions that engage in the work of finding or fabricating objects and entities for the sake of what's called governance of the social, with sensitivity to the need on the part of museums and related institutions of world culture, including, of course, the university, to orient themselves away from the work of merely displaying object as if they were texts, readable as ideologies. Bennett followed another critic, Alfred Gell, with his concern for the action-centered approach to art as a system of action intended to change the world rather than to encode symbolic propositions about it. More specifically, Bennett argued for the shift to the practical mediatory role of art objects in the social projects, with attention to the distributed relations between classes, castes, state groups, or communities. It is very clear that such a shift demands attention to the processes by which objects come to be enfranchised or made displayable and fabricated, and with what interests and psychosocial dynamics and effects. What I would claim we have here before us in this virtual digitized meta exhibition and related symposium, concession, of course, to our common plight in relation to the worldwide virus and maddeningly varied, uncoordinated responses to it, is intended to be and to do something different from the traditional positing of a stable text of presumed Weltkultur. It is something more akin to Bennett and Gell's ideas. We have here to offer counterpoint to the canonical show and tell as a message about power and control. This exhibition is intended to open a window not simply onto different historically hidden or undervalued objects or items or registrations, although that is indeed the case in comparison to the usual stagings. With the intentional arrangements of different types of objects and representations, the aim of this exhibition is to offer provocative, even disturbing significations of half views, veilings, what I here call masquerade or maskings of multiple conflicting sources, objects, alter representations, instability, if not the impossibility of storytelling itself, refusals around being signified and related along the lines of the canonical. always appearing in some form or media mode, what I would call the scriptural. It is a wide open window onto multiple layered stories, onto brokenness, humiliations, degradations, chaos, slavery, but also onto, at times, flight, resistance, intentionally alternative orientations, occasional instances or islands of refreshment, joy, all short of what I would term redemption. It is in sum a window onto the construction, naturalization, maintenance, defense, disruption, destabilization of modernities, those social, cultural, political, economic arrangements, performances, practices, creeds, ideologies that we are made in different ways to experience, inhabit, negotiate, in different bodies, types of bodies, to be sure, in different times, and by which we differently identify ourselves and relate to others. The masquerade, the play element in culture, captures the paradox of the rather serious implications for our thinking and ramifications for orientations and dynamics and practices that maintain modernities. Just as in general and as a matter of official discourse, the exhibition itself is, I claim, metonymic of the masquerade itself, of the claims about modernities normally assumed to be controlled and represented by those whom we now call white men, always and everywhere, with few exceptions, the curators. So the term masquerade is here used as broad, if not universal, framing concept for social cultural play, production, capacious and provocative theorizing and analysis of all such. The term masquerade does not, in the most basic, archaic terms, and should not even now signify only a narrow moralizing, as in duplicity or failing of some sort. From its archaic European usages, Spanish mascara, French mascarada, Italian mascara, handed to us, already we are thereby located within a semiosphere. This term signifies complexity, not only a kind of moralizing, it's the necessarily layered and indirect ways that humans, and in fact other living creatures, communicate with one another and negotiate their shared space. The masquerade is quite natural in almost all historical social situations. In others, it is imposed or accepted as necessary for survival. What proves to be striking, disturbing, and unavoidable in excavating modernities as masquerade is the persistence and ubiquity of race, of course in quotation marks, complexly and disturbingly refracted in terms of racializations, racialisms, racisms, and since the eras and experiences of first contact, if not before then, connected always to the black-fleshed as phantasm, eventually as fixed text or scripture that is made up to be and to produce and reflect a certain construal or hierarchicalization of reality. This argument needs here to be forcefully made. Other types of enfleshed and engendered persons have been, to be sure, historically, and still are so, instrumentalized and subjugated. Of this, there can be no denial. Intersectionality of oppression and violence is real, but competition over whose flesh has been more degraded is not useful. I maintain and invite serious thinking among all about how and to what extent the black flesh might and should serve as fraught synecdoche for the construction of modernities. And here I direct your attention to discussions elsewhere, including Anne McClintock's Imperial Leather. All too evident as charged phenomenon in the aftermath of the dynamics of first contacts that becomes the permanent enslavement of Black fleshed peoples, race following, not preceding racialization and racism. So we learn from the likes of Merleau-Ponty, becomes, if not the originary, certainly the most persistent, consequential impetus behind and production of masquerade in the making of modernities. Race has come to define or frame the modern regimes, what I call scripturalization, and its twists and turns, varied dynamics, what I prefer to call scriptural lectics of the modern or modernities. The opening of the wide and provocative window onto scripturalization, scripturalizing of Black flesh, Black face is facilitated in this somewhat intentionally meta exhibition. In this exhibition, there's no stable regime or stable regime message represented except to be signified on. There are no canonical archival sources that showcase and define the limit in simple terms, the state of the dominant cultural order, its project, its argument or orientation. On the contrary, here, the dominant or symbolic order is already decentered, non-canonically positioned, thus the placement of items. This destabilization is effected through playful, my decidedly undisciplinary and layered focus as a kind of gateway to, and in turn making use of as gateway, one of the earliest and best known complex early Anglophone Black Atlantic narratives. So that takes us to the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano or Gustavus Vassa, the African written by himself, first published in 1789. This performance of self-narration on the part of this male ex-slave in the context of Anglophone maritime culture and related slaveholding cultures was something of a bestseller during its time. I leave it to you to track more details about his person. It is an utterly fascinating piece to read and to play with. I think we have the frontispiece, his title page and frontispiece. I would ask you to linger with that on your own terms. The interesting narrative, as a writer had hoped it would be, is indeed of compelling interest to would-be moderns of all types. It's registered, of course, in the way in which he plays through painful experiences, of course, and exploits the challenges and opportunities to identify himself, Black, Negro, African, almost Englishman, Christian, not anymore simply Igbo. These phenomena and dynamics are, through the writer's story or gaze, unavoidably, I argue, to be seen in terms of basic masking, as play and memetics, as invention and fraught exercise of the patho-sociological imagination, with the writer's complex subjectivation as disturbing challenge to all moderns regarding simple default notions of a storyline, regarding identity, culture, nation, ideology, politics. The narrative is also of profound interest because it opens a window of a critical, onto critical imagination, akin to what I understand Saidiya Hartman to mean with her concept of critical fabulation. Here, reflection on disturbing issues and questions and developments over time, with Equiano Vasa from the perspective of a stranger, one who, both on account of significations of his flesh and his own excess of mimeticized awareness. These are nodal points for theorizing and analyzing larger issues and problems having to do with finding a self, writing a self, and with social cultural formation. With the language that marks our title here, Everything About Me Was Magic, and as part of the framing epigraph for the exhibition, the story of Equiano Vasa as the story of construction of modernities and their twists and turns is now opened and unfurled, it seems to me, in a different way. Magic, masquerade, masking, these categories and the phenomena they point to, we're invited with this exhibition and symposium to think hard about hard things. From this point, of course, I can only summarize some of the points I think are very important to touch on. Let me summarize briefly the various scenes or stages that structure the exhibition to give you a sense of what was at work in my own thinking, to give you opportunity to think even more deeply or differently. Stage one here, all of the stages being marked by expressions that come from Equiano's narrative. We Igbos are a nation of dancers, musicians, poets. Here displays, this section displays examples mostly from Africa, Black Africa, of the basic representations of the play element or masquerade or magic that defines social relations. The literal, colorful mask of human beings makes the dramatic point that complex social life entails masking, even the cult of masking, even ritual masquerade for the sake of basic communication and structuring and orientation to the world. If we go to the image for George Harley, an important book, I think, although dated, that will nonetheless help orient us to the type of questions that are important. You see it already in the title, Mass as Agents of Social Control, here focusing on Northeast Liberia. You should also see the wonderful frontispiece with a small personal mask, the meh of an important man, though almost always a man in the community through whom all things are believed to be kept in balance. I leave it to you, according to your interest, to follow related links for more information. This basic yet complex phenomenon is universal, found in real or contemporary time and throughout history. I would want to stress that contra the argument of Johan Huizinga about such matters, the book title about the play element in culture, it's not really a matter of reflecting the separate play element in culture, it seems to me. Rather, what we see before us suggests culture itself as play. And this play, as we follow the lead of Equiano Vasa's interesting narrative, shows us exactly what is at stake in order to come to understand and negotiate a world. In other words, it is all play. Stage two, the white men had some spell or magic. This section points to the long history of modern world European, colonial, and before such other imperial dominant regimes, their control of forms of representation and mediatization. In the modern world, this has especially, though not exclusively, involved writing and the printing and distribution of books and related objects. as well as or as part of the advancement of scientific exploration. This is the import of Francis Bacon's cover page. You may see this as part of his Instauratio Magna, prominently situated in the exhibition. It features ships going beyond what are called the Pillar of Hercules. In that going beyond, there is much poignancy and multiple levels of irony in the fact that there would be, among the discoveries or contacts to be made, blackfish-fleshed peoples, with all that that would mean in history and for our time. It is the fetishization of what is discovered by Bacon's folks who go about exploring the world that Equiano Vassa deftly identifies and characterizes for the reader, and it is of course all disturbing. It also makes clear the psychopolitical and violent uses captured perfectly in the ancient cum European world trope, translatio studii et imperii, transfer of knowledge and power. It seems to me scripturalization captures perfectly, it's my preferred term, of course, white men's semiosphere or epistemic regime for such transfer. A profound imaging of how things looked or were arranged in Bacon's age and were poised to develop can be seen in the anonymous image of the 1575 inauguration of the University of Leiden. Here, with all the important discourses and their representatives festooned, should we say massed, in procession. Note here the position of sacred scriptures, first among the discourses, and I maintain metonymic of modern Western discourse. This should be lost on no one of us. I also draw your attention briefly to the continuing hold of this medium, a stand-in for various media, the book, the discourse regime in other forms in our times. I draw your attention just quickly to a New Yorker cartoon that features the intimidating book. The classics can be so intimidating. Of course, the point to be made. And of course, Facebook in the news these days, but look at how it's imaged as a type of classic intimidating text or scripture in its own right. Stage 3, the book remains silent. This casts a light onto the disturbing nature of the violence that white men's magic in the form of the regime of the fetish of the scriptural is made to do, traditionally analyzed in terms of the talking book trope by which Black Atlantic figures of the 18th and 19th centuries, mostly slaves or ex-slaves, recognized the magic of white men's books and announced their desperation and anxiety over at first not being able to read these books, to engage them. You'll see some examples in the exhibition. They share the genre, or one of the genres that on which we might hang Equiano Vassa's interesting narrative. Various expressive practices and ideologies, and the maintenance of such silence is masquerade, so becomes the chaotic impetus behind the production of modernities. You should note one fascinating example is the painting of the so-called 7 Years' War, French-Indian Wars, it's also been called, in a kind of chilling, complex relationship to which, by the way, the newly renamed Gustavus Vasas was made to serve as servant to a British naval officer. The this very same war. Cringeworthy is the likely honest point of identification for the newly Gustavus Vasa, the name change in relationship to the war, in addition to what was at stake, as you can see with this image. Note how the colored native body has been used as a kind of hieroglyphics signifying complex impulses and emotions, anxieties having to do with the making of the modern world, here to be called North America, in relation to the presence of that non-white flesh, of course, in total silence. The myth of North America, let's say, inspiration for continuing interest in this genre of text that was first brought to my attention by an ISS colleague, Katrina Van Heest, part of her contribution to ISS meeting last. One only has to imagine for one moment, I cannot possibly be the only one whose mind would veer off in this direction, what such an image would, focused on the formation of the United States, would look like with a black fleshed person in the center. Could we imagine a George Floyd or Breonna Taylor? How would they be positioned in such an image? Chilling to consider. The same point I make in relation to the development reflected by another famous painting, this of T.D. Rice, featured as Jim Crow at the Bowery Theater in New York City in the early 19th century, 1833 to be exact. Actual black fleshed persons notwithstanding, all the noises and images and gestures that define blackface traditions are rendered eerily silent. It is certainly worth your time to pursue the study of this image as a kind of text. Allow me to say here, I agree wholeheartedly with critics such as Eric Lott and others, Love and Theft and Blackface Minstrelsy and the American working class, along with others who see in the painting the anxiety that the black body provokes. It is a must-see, a must-dwell-on representation of a sort we should name as anti-black flesh anxiety and its program of racism. I cannot be the only one who sees a connection between this anxious crowd that's imaged around the faux black person in the form of T.D. Rice and the crowd that chased the black officer in the Capitol building. The very presence of the real or imagined black body and the anxieties that it sets in motion. Stage 4, the Ethiopian was willing to be saved by Jesus Christ. This makes the turn to efforts on the part of black fleshed peoples to, quote, make do with the fetish. In Equiano Vasa's interesting narrative, this includes, of course, religious conversion, to be sure, but there is more at issue, more at stake. Another close reading, what I would prefer to think of as transdisciplinary excavation, can hardly fail to help us take note of the fact that in this life story, conversion is a kind of stand-in, if you will, for larger ongoing attempts to be saved within or into white men's world. So many examples here that mark our history. I'm going to point to just a couple of examples. I'll need to move along. Here, of course, one can go with the music. Think of Equiano's conversion, what that set in motion. On the other side of that experience is continuing efforts at negotiation. We will provide some examples in our interludes. I'm thinking of the early 20th century songster named Blind Willie Johnson, who wrote the song, "I'm Gonna Run to the City of Refuge, Run to the City of Refuge, I'm Gonna Run." Or the music given to us by, in a way that no one else could provide it, written by Thomas Dorsey, of course, "The Lord Will Make a Way Somehow." Listen to the words and her rendering of such words and sentiments. "The Lord will make a way somehow, like a ship that's tossed and driven, battered by the angry sea. When the storms of life are raging, the fury falls on me. I wonder what I've done that makes this race so hard to run. And I say to my soul, don't worry, the Lord will make a way somehow." Or his other famous work, "The Old Ship of Zion," being lost in sin and sorrow, negotiating the unsteady ship, which is the new world needing to be negotiated. Stage 5, the scriptures became an unsealed book of things that can never be told. Words that are halting, necessarily so perhaps, that try to help us recognize sedimented and ongoing complexity, specifically the challenges pertaining to the need both to continue to mask and unmask all at once, indeed to identify and negotiate different layers of mask that define the trauma of the experience one was forced into with a certain flesh on the part of those explorers who went past the Pillars of Hercules. I make the point that there is, from my perspective as curator here and critic, no redemption assumed to be on the horizon. Racialization produced by scripturalization, and scripturalization supercharged by racialization, cannot now be unread or undone. There remains for all only constant struggle for and the maintenance of sharp-edged self-reflexivity. And so many examples that can here be used. We'll try to fill in some of this again with the music. I turn toward preliminary conclusion at any rate. As I take stock of what has been accessed and placed before you, I should like now to attempt to draw some strings together. Much more work needs to be done on all of the issues raised. The different types of mass used in different social contexts of social relations, to be sure. I think that I want to draw your attention here at the end to an argument made by literary critic Houston Baker. I think he got it exactly right when he observed that masking is minstrelsy, and that the minstrel mask, and here I quote him, is a space of habitation not only for repressed spirits of sexuality, ludic play, insatisfaction, castration anxiety, and a mirror stage of development, but also for that deep-seated denial of the indisputable humanity of inhabitants of and descendants from Africa and other places. Furthermore, I agree with Baker that the work of masquerade, although ancient in origins, perhaps universal, is a kind of possession that profoundly grips and affects all, and so must be analyzed with utmost sensitivity. And here I want to quote him again, where he says, what is involved in the possession, in any case, is supplementarity, what he calls the immediately mediating appearance, a specter or shadow of a second and secondary self. In specifically diaspora terms, he says being possessed as slave, but also being possessed, with another freighted meaning, is more than a necessary doubling or inscribed otherness of the conscripted, those who come as necessity with writing. The possessed are governed not simply by script, but also by productive conditions that render their entire play a tripling. And so here we have then the phenomenon of the layering of the masking with a particular burden on particular peoples. So layering upon layering upon layering of masking, along with the cult of masquerade. I want to remind you that Toni Morrison, in the hard lesson she conveys to us in story form that is beloved, renders the dramatic experience of the Black female especially as that dirtied, haunted, and haunting figure that cannot be denied. And here she, in the end, plays with the term I want to end with. I can't settle the matter, but I want you to continue to pick it up and play with it and allow it to disturb you further. Playing with passing, being passed over, what cannot really be related and passed over in scriptural terms is what I think we are left with and must pick up with. There can be no more poignant argument that could be made at this point. It especially complicates even further her notion of passing and passing on. The piece from a recent New York Times magazine about a white female with this project on Nella Larsen's novel Passing must be looked at again in relationship not only to Morrison and Fanon going back, but also back to Equiano. Equiano, in the end, found it difficult, as layered and as thick as is his narrative, to write without halting words what in fact should be related in the end or passed on. These are hard questions and hard issues. The work before us has to do with figuring out what can and should be passed along and on what terms. Let me ask you to think about all of these questions and issues. Let the hard questions stay before us. Let the hard discussions about all such matters begin in earnest. Thank you very much.